The following podcast is a Dear Media production.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to a special episode of the Real Stuff podcast that's going to be a hybrid, part solo and part expert. This is the sleep training episode that you've all been waiting for and that I've been waiting to record for a while now. But I wanted to gather my thoughts, and I also wanted to make sure I could find time to talk to an expert to include that in this episode so it's not just a solo. Because, of course, I am not a sleep training expert. I'm just a parent who did some form of sleep training and who has children who are now sleeping through the night. So I want to start this podcast by introducing exactly what we did when it came to sleep training, and then that will be followed up by a larger, deeper conversation with our expert. I knew this was a perfect topic for this podcast because I find sleep training, for whatever reason, to be such a taboo topic. Why is that so? I don't exactly know, but people have really strong feelings about this. I think most people's first impression when they hear that someone is doing any form of sleep training is that you are probably letting your baby, quote, cry it out. Some people take that to the extreme and they decide that sleep training is just cruel and unusual punishment. You're not responding to your baby's needs. You're letting them cry. It's inhumane. It's just not right. That's what a lot of people seem to say. That is not at all what we did. When I say we slept trained, I don't even know the past tense of that. When I say that we did sleep training with our babies, we did not do anything like that. That doesn't look anything like what we did. But I think that is a lot of people's first impression, and it makes having a conversation about sleep training so challenging because you are immediately, the moment those two words are thrown out, you're immediately cast into this category of not responding to your baby and leaving them and psychologically damaging them. And I would love to read this one post that I found on Instagram recently because as I was scrolling and I came across this, I felt like it truly encapsulates the whole black and white nature of this conversation. Someone posted a reel. I won't even say her name, but the text on screen says, I keep seeing posts from people about how their nervous system doesn't know the difference between something not dangerous and being chased by a bear. And yet, so many people swear by sleep training, expecting a tiny baby's nervous system to know the difference between being left alone to cry in the dark and being abandoned forever, with a crying emoji. I quickly clicked into the comments because, to be honest, I was a little triggered by that because I felt like this comment was suggesting that what I did to my baby made my baby feel as if she were abandoned forever. So I clicked into the comments, and a couple comments that I saw triggered me even further. So one comment here says, it's actually disturbing how many people try to get out of things that come with having babies and small children. They always try to find what is most convenient for them instead of what's best for the baby. Sometimes I wonder why people have any children at all if they are so quick to make them self-sufficient. And the next comment says, quote, it works because they stopped crying. Actually, they stopped crying because they knew you were not coming, not because they self-settled. Long story short, the commentary and the essence of that post was essentially that it is an awful thing to do to sleep train your baby and that you probably should not have had kids if you don't want to wake up with them at night. This was an issue I ran into when I even posted that I used a baby nurse. So you probably heard me talk about that in the Maddie episode. A handful of people said to me, why even have a baby if you don't want to wake up with the baby at night, if you're going to hire someone else to do that? And I just don't believe that. And I don't believe that you shouldn't have had a baby if you want to teach the baby to sleep. I just don't believe it. There's so much to get into here, but let me first start by diving into what we did for sleep training. We followed a book that is called 12 Hour Sleep by 12 Weeks Old. You may have heard it shortened to 12 by 12. With Milo, we really followed this closely, to a T. With Coco, less so, and we also started it a little bit later, but both kids were sleeping 12 hours by around 12 weeks. Maybe with Coco, it was closer to 14 weeks. The general gist of the 12 by 12 method, it's actually less about leaving your baby to cry and teaching them to self-soothe. And it's more similar to if you've ever heard of the Instagram account or business concept called full feedings, where it's more so about encouraging your baby to fill up their belly during the day so that they are weaning off of nighttime feeds and they are no longer hungry, no longer waking up, and no longer having a desire to eat or drink milk at night, which then will lead them to be sleeping during those hours. This podcast could be so long if I really dove into every element of it. But the long story short is the recommended start time for sleep training the baby in that book is at 8 weeks. And you can start if your baby is 9+ pounds, getting at least 24 ounces of milk in a 24-hour period. But at 6 weeks, you're not technically starting the training, but you are starting to get your baby onto a rhythm and a schedule. So basically, you kind of have to designate what's going to be my wake up time and what's my go to bed time. So let's say you're doing 7:30 a.m. as wake up and 7:30 p.m. is put down. That's our schedule right now. You sort of designate the day in that 12-hour window. Step 1 at 6 weeks was getting them on a schedule of eating every 3 hours. So 7:30 a.m., 10:30 a.m., 1:30 p.m., 4:30 p.m., 7:30 p.m. And usually around that time, obviously every baby's different, but you're giving them however much they take at each feed. Usually for us, that was somewhere between 3 to 4 ounces a feed. At 8 weeks, the idea is you're now switching them to an every 4-hour eating schedule, and you're increasing the amount of milk that you're offering at each feed so that you can still get them to 24 ounces in those 4 feeds, which means 6 ounces a feed at least. I think the max is supposed to be 8 ounces a feed because that would be 32 ounces in a day, and the doctors recommend 24 to 32 ounces in a day. This part of the sleep training, I believe, is the hardest part. It's all what's happening during the day right now. So far, you've done nothing at night. The hardest part, I believe, is switching them to the 4-hour schedule instead of the 3-hour schedule because they are cranky during the day and they want to eat more frequently. But holding them off for that extra hour and then increasing the amount that you're offering has ripple effects into the nighttime. And what we realized with both kids is once we switched them from this every 3-hour to every 4-hour schedule, slowly but surely, they started naturally without us needing to do anything, pushing back their nighttime sleep and sleeping for longer windows at night. A 3-hour stretch, then a 4-hour stretch. There's a lot to talk about here with the feeding. I know a lot of people have trouble getting 6 ounces in their baby every feed. I will say with Coco, she was struggling to take even 3 ounces of feed when we were in the 6 to 8 week period. And then when we switched her around 8 or 9 weeks to the every 4-hour feed, she just did it. I was confident there was no way she was going to take 6 ounces at a time, but she did it. And now she drinks an 8-ounce bottle 4 times a day. So I'm not saying every baby can do it, but I was confident Coco could not, and she proved me wrong. Hey guys, I'm popping in here, separate day. I was just editing this video and realized that I could probably go into way more detail, and I want this episode to be extremely serviceable for you guys. So I'm going to give you exact time codes and break out exactly what we did. So as I said, once we switched to the every 4 hours feed and we started increasing the amount of milk, and I'm just going to use Milo as an example, the amount of milk he was taking, that was when he slowly started to fall into a rhythm in terms of how often he was waking up at night. And for him, he kind of got to a place where he was waking up 3 times consistently. Usually we'd put him to bed. He'd wake up one time around 11 p.m., then again around 1 or 2 a.m., and then again around 4 or 5 a.m. The sleep training method in the 12 by 12 book encourages you to tackle each of those 3 nighttime wakings individually. And when I say tackle, I mean you're like phasing them off of this feed. So you're supposed to eliminate the second feed first, then the third feed, and then the first feed. So just keep that in mind. If you're breastfeeding, the expert will get a little bit later into this episode about how to actually diminish the amount of minutes that you're breastfeeding for. And it could be sort of similar to what I'm talking about doing here with bottles, but we were bottle feeding during sleep training. And what we did going into sleep training was tracked exactly how many ounces Milo was taking at each of those 3 feeds. And just to make it nice and simple, let's say your baby is waking up 3 times a night, and at each of those feeds, they're taking 3 ounces. So let's look at that second wake up time, the one that's around 1 or 2 a.m. Step 1 to eliminate that feed is to drop the number of ounces that you're offering your baby at that time to 2.5 ounces. So you're just dropping it by half an ounce. And you're sticking to that for 3 days. 3 days later, you drop it by another half ounce. Now you're only offering 2 ounces at that feed. 3 days later, it's 1.5 ounces. You see what I'm saying? At this point in time, because your baby is on some sort of schedule in terms of what time they wake up, at these wake up times, you're not actually trying to get them to not wake up. All you're doing is focusing on weaning them off of the milk at this time. So that's the stage we're at here. What you will probably notice, as we noticed, is that as you diminish by half an ounce every few days, odds are you're not going to have to go all the way down to 0, because what starts to happen is, at least for us, once we got to like the 2-ounce mark or the 1.5-ounce mark for a couple days, Milo just realized there's not a lot of milk at this time, so I don't need to wake up at this time anymore for milk. And he would start pushing that time back farther and further. There's logic behind phasing out that second feed first, but basically what happened for us was that second feed, which was usually around 1 a.m., just kept getting pushed back later and later until it combined with the third feed. So at this point, he was now waking up once at around 11 p.m. and then once at around 4 or 5 a.m. So now we had gotten him to 2 nighttime feeds. And so the goal now is to wean him off the second one of those. Remember, the order was tackling the second feed, then the third feed, then the first. So we just got rid of the second, and now we're on to the third feed, which is this 4 or 5 a.m. one. You do the same thing. Every 3 days, reduce the number of ounces. The only thing to know here about being aware of the timing that your baby's waking up, and one reason why it might be useful to keep a log of what time they're waking up. Let's just say for that 1 a.m. feed, you had been feeding the baby at 1 a.m. and then the next night they actually sleep all the way until 2. Now you know your baby can wait for that feed until 2. So if the next night they wake up for the food at 1, that's when you're supposed to use all of the strategies in your toolkit to soothe them, to hold them off, so that they can push it to the latest time they were ever able to make it to. I hope that makes sense, but really that's the only element of this stage of the sleep training that involves trying to hold your baby off. Otherwise, if they are waking up on a pretty strict schedule, you could just go ahead and feed them, and it's all just about weaning them off. So back to that third feed, we weaned him off that third feed, and actually pretty quickly after we started diminishing the ounces in that third feed just went away. So he started actually pushing the first wake up to be a little bit later. He was waking up now at like 1 a.m. as his first wake up. And then that last feed was just totally disappeared because he started stretching from that 1 a.m. wake up until morning wake up at 7:30. And then the last step of the process is phasing out the first feed, which you do the exact same way, diminishing the number of ounces and always trying to hold your baby off to the latest time they were ever able to make it for that feed. If any of this was too complicated for you to absorb in an audio format like this, please read the 12 by 12 book. I've read it now about 6 or 7 times because I kept refreshing myself during the process. It's very short. You can read it in one night. I took notes in the margins. It's simple, straightforward, gives it to you all very clearly. This sleep training method involved very little crying for us. It was really about finding out when they were waking up, when we were ultimately fully weaned off the nighttime feeds and I wasn't offering any milk at that time. It was about working with them to let them self-soothe. So there's a lot of setting a timer for 5 minutes, seeing if they're still crying. If during the 5-minute timer they sort of stop or slow down, even if just for like 30 seconds, I reset the timer for another 5 minutes. There was never a period of time when either of my kids were screaming, crying for me for longer than like 15 minutes. Usually by the time my timer would run out, they would have self-soothed and fallen back asleep. It's important to note that people think of sleep training as they also think of potty training as a one-time process. And the truth is neither of those things are a one-time thing you do. Sleep training, I believe, is a lifelong practice. I feel like I'm still sleep training myself. I'm still making tweaks and changes and learning how to improve my sleep. And with kids, you need to keep on doing this training. There are regressions, you go on vacations, things throw them off, they hit milestones, things change, you transition from a crib to a bed, you transition from a swaddle to a sleep sack. There's always new things you're teaching them, and it is a process. It's not a one-time shot. But I would love to go back to this comment on social media where this person is claiming that it's disturbing how parents are always trying to find what is most convenient for them instead of what's best for the baby. I really feel the need to point out here that sleep training a baby, although very convenient in the long run and is very helpful for the parents and the children and the whole family benefits from it, I don't actually find that it's the most convenient, easy way out method in the moment. To take on sleep training as something that you are going to commit to help your child learn how to sleep, it's actually one of the hardest things to do because you wind up being awake overnight, going into their room, setting the timer for 5 minutes, going in, soothing them, helping to teach them and guide them on how to go back to sleep themselves. When I actually think the easy way out, if you're talking about an easy way out, I actually think the easier thing to do is to just say, fuck it, pick the baby up, put them on your chest, and let them fall asleep there. Or pick the baby up, bring them into bed with you, and they'll be happy, and you can go to sleep there. I actually think that sounds like the easier method. I think that easier method in the short term leads to harder, longer term problems with sleep where your baby is 6, 7 years old and they're still wanting to sleep with you or still can't fall asleep without you in the room. But don't get me wrong, in the short term, that feels like the easy way out. I actually think sleep training is the harder method. It doesn't strike me as something that you're just doing for yourself. Yes, I fully can admit that selfishly, I wanted to sleep, but I also really wanted my babies to be getting long, good quality sleep. And I felt like this process of going through the sleep training and learning their cues and really listening to them and watching them closely on the monitor and going into the room and trying the different soothing tactics and seeing what worked for them, this was a deep commitment to learning how to understand my babies and learning their cues. It is actually the opposite from ignoring their cues and not listening to them. It's like I was so tuned into my babies during sleep training that I learned them more than ever. And I would argue that it brought me closer and gave me a better understanding of both of my babies. I also felt to my core that sleep training my babies did not disrupt their ability to feel comforted or regulated or connected to me. I have 2 very happy babies. I have a very happy baby and a very happy toddler who both sleep through the night from 7:30 until 7:30. And I believe they feel a very secure attachment style. But I want to call out, I acknowledge that I'm not always doing everything right here. I'm not an expert in anything regarding parenting. So you will hear in this interview that I am asking those hard questions, even if it's going to lead to an answer that tells me that I'm doing something wrong. So I do ask her, is this psychologically damaging to my child? I do ask her, is the baby giving up crying because they are just learning no one's coming for them? I do ask her, is it even healthy for a baby to be sleeping 12 hours in a row, or is it actually better biologically for a baby's brain for them to be waking up and eating every few hours? I wasn't trying to tailor these questions to like prove my point here or prove that what I did was right. I really was diving in and wanting to get to the truth and the scientific answers. Someone might argue, well, you brought someone on the podcast who, quote, believes in sleep training. So, of course, she's going to say this, and there's a whole other argument to be had, and you're not bringing on the other side. And that is true. This conversation is not rounded out by me bringing on someone else who is adamantly against sleep training. But you will hear Zan, the expert who we bring on, citing studies. And I really wanted to bring on someone who has just been immersed in this world for years and years and spent way more hours doing research and decoding that research into this topic than I've been able to do, and has had way more experience with way more babies than I've had. I've only done this with 2 babies. Zan has hundreds of 5-star Google reviews and testimonials. So if nothing else, I think you can start by just heading over to her social media page. It's at MyBaby Sleepology, and just checking out her content, consuming it for free, and seeing what you think. Once again, this is just what we did and what worked for us. A major pillar of the 12 by 12 book, which our expert gets into, involves making sure that you are putting the baby down to sleep while they are still awake and teaching them to fall asleep without you. I think the key is you don't want the baby to fall asleep in your arms, and then you slowly, carefully, silently, sneakily transfer them to the crib, because then, of course, when they wake up, they're going to cry and be upset that they're no longer where they thought they were. And from the start of Coco's life, at least, we did many contact naps when she was younger. She would nap on us all the time. Even to this day, she's on a 3-nap-a-day schedule. And the 3rd nap is more of a cat nap. She takes that nap in people's arms or in the carrier. It's just that most of our naps are crib naps on her back, putting herself to sleep, falling asleep awake. So she would lie there, kind of rest, look up at the camera, and then slowly close her eyes and drift off to sleep. The book that I'm referencing is a very affordable book on Amazon. So if nothing else, it's worth reading it and seeing if the method aligns with you. But I always recommend my friends to combine methods and to combine, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, try this, try that. I also really loved the Taking Care of Babies sleep program. And with Milo, at one point, I forget when it was, maybe a regression, I looked into the Taking Care of Babies method, and she had this whole method of all the steps you can go through to try to soothe your baby before you pick them up and before you offer them milk. And that was really helpful to me too. So we really did piece things together. And at the end of the day, this is a very personal decision, and there's not one right or wrong way. I do hope that as a listener, if you align more closely with the people who were commenting this on that Instagram post I'm talking about, I hope that you could just listen with an open mind. No one's making a comment about what's right or wrong or what's best for your baby. None of these methods are trying to tell you that you are doing something wrong. There are just methods out there for people so that everyone can go down the path that's best for them. I hope you find this episode useful. If you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to DM me or to DM Zan, and we are both here for you. And without further ado, let's get into the expert part of this conversation. So many people have recommended you to me, and I've also just been following you probably since I was trying to get Milo to sleep through the night, and love your content. Find that it's really approachable, really accepting of whatever a parent wants to do. It's not like a one-size-fits-all approach. But I would just love to hear from you, being a baby sleep expert, knowing everything you know about baby sleep. Let's talk specifically about newborns. A person comes home from the hospital, or their baby comes out in their home birth. They say as quickly as possible, ideally as soon as they can, I would love for this baby to be sleeping through the night so that I myself can sleep through the night.
Right.
Where do you even start with people?
Yeah. So I always like to give warning, you'll call it, of like, you got to survive the first 6 to 8 weeks, because the first 6 to 8 weeks, your baby does not know days versus nights. They're flip-flopped. So we need to get through those first 6 to 8 weeks and get their days and nights corrected. So one of the things that I would highly recommend for that age is exposing them to as much natural sunlight during the day, pitch black at night, no night lights or anything. Don't tiptoe around during the day. Like, we want to help them to be able to decipher the two. The faster we can do that, the faster they're going to see progress in their baby sleeping those longer stretches at night versus during the day. Another thing I would recommend during the day is capping the naps at 2 hours so that they start to understand, okay, longer stretches happen at night and not during the day. And also, don't put too much stress or pressure on yourselves. Kind of like go with the flow of a newborn baby. Their sleep is so insanely erratic that, and just being a new mom is stressful enough that we don't want the pressure of like, you need to fit into this mold by 8 weeks. Like, it is okay. The first 16 weeks, babies are just so unpredictable. So I have so many clients who come to me and they're like, I'm all over these mommy Facebook groups, and like, I'm seeing 6-week-olds or 8-week-olds who are sleeping through the night already. And my baby is so far from that. I'm like, do not compare your baby to anyone else's baby.
Anyone who's brought a newborn home knows that they really are asleep for basically the whole day. Yeah. I mean, they could be passed from hands to hands. You could be running around. I mean, in the case of our second, she's sleeping on the counter while our son is literally running around screaming at the top of his lungs.
Yeah.
And she's undisturbed. But it feels like they're sleeping all day. And then it's easy to feel like, why are they awake all night? And that's just because you're also really sensitive to any nighttime wake ups. You obviously want to get as much sleep as you can. If you watch, I actually have a YouTube video up from when Milo was 7 weeks. And I watch it now and I'm like, this is kind of embarrassing. Like, I was an insanely scheduled mom. We did not do that, anything close to that with my second. Yeah. But it was the energy of first child. We've got to get on this schedule. I'm following this book. And at 6 to 7 weeks, he was on this daytime schedule. When someone comes to you and says, what is an age that it's actually, feasible to start any sort of schedule? What age do you cite? And also, what schedule do you recommend for the earliest of early infants?
Good question. So scientifically, melatonin, which is a sleepy hormone, that starts being secreted around the 12-week mark. melatonin and cortisol are what control our internal clock. So that starts being secreted around the 12-week mark. At low levels and inconsistent, it's much higher at the 16-week mark, which is when their internal clock is full blown. But at 12 weeks is when we start to see them naturally form that schedule. Before that point, any work that you're doing, it's the parents who would be controlling that schedule, if that makes sense. At 12 weeks, that's when we start to see them forming that schedule all on their own. But at 16 weeks, it's a heck of a lot stronger and there's so much more you can control. I have so many people who come to me and they're like, I am type A. I need a schedule. And I'm like, listen, we can put something loose together and we can follow that by capping naps at certain times or certain lengths. But we sort of have to go with the flow and be a little bit flexible for now. And the most important thing right now until 16 weeks is that the baby is as rested as possible, is getting those feeds in, that they're being loved, all the things, just like really obviously being taken care of. And then just hold on to that. And then at 16 weeks, there's so much more we can control. I also say those first 12 weeks, we want to replicate that womb-like environment. So the 5S's are incredibly helpful for new parents. So the fourth trimester, I just say, do what you got to do to get everyone as much sleep as possible, as long as it's safe. And then at 12 weeks, we can really start practicing independent sleep where we're focusing. Let's say parents really enjoy those contact naps. Enjoy that, do it. And then at 12 weeks, we can start practicing. And then from 12 to 16 weeks, it's really just about practicing, placing them down more awake versus asleep. And then at 16 weeks, for parents who want to sleep train, I'm like, let's get to it.
You just mentioned the 5S's. What are those?
Okay, so the 5S's are meant to replicate the womb environment. So swaddling, because that helps them feel nice and snug like they were in the womb, sucking, pacifiers or your finger, shushing, so a loud sound, that's where white noise really comes into play, holding them on their side, and also swaying.
So if someone comes to you and says, my baby's on a daytime schedule as best as possible, we have set feed times in the day and I'm trying to get X amount of ounces in them at that feed and they're usually taking it, and I'm waking them if they're sleeping too long, and their daytime is pretty dialed in, but now it's just nighttime. They're waking up 2 or 3 times a night, sometimes not even wanting food, but just wanting me or wanting to be picked up.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm now exhausted, 12 weeks postpartum. I've been doing this for 3 months now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so scared that if I attempt any form of sleep training for this baby, that I'm going to have to do a cry it out method. And I'm just going to have to sit in my room and listen to them cry. And it's going to break my little heart. And I can't bear it.
Yeah.
What do you say to that? Is there another way? How would you guide a parent that's in that predicament?
Yes. Well, first of all, I would say I felt the same way. Like I couldn't do cry it out either. I did a modified version of Ferber with all 3 of my girls. Most people who are reaching out to us, and I've been doing this for over 9 years, we've worked with thousands of clients. Most people are looking for an alternative. Most
Right.
people don't want to just place their baby down and not go in until the morning. So I would reassure them that there are several other methods that they can choose from. We can also modify those methods to fit the parent's comfort level, but any method is going to work as long as they are consistent. And the other huge piece to it that I feel like is so underrated is the timing of things. And the number one sleep tip that I would give a parent is that the very last thing we want to happen is that your baby gets overtired. Because if they get overtired, then cortisol is secreted, which is a stress hormone and a stimulant. And that is the last thing we want to happen, because that's when all hell breaks loose. And that's when we see more frequent night wakings, longer night wakings, like all of the sleep issues under the sun. The number one trigger is that a baby is overtired or that they're on an incorrect schedule for their age. So being on an age-appropriate schedule, nailing timing, and staying consistent is really the key to it all coming together.
So if I was one of these parents and I'm on a consultation call with you and I'm telling you I've got my day dialed in, my baby went to sleep pretty easily, meaning I'm pretty sure I put him or her down at a reasonable time, and they fell asleep and then I left, but now they're still waking me up and calling me back in multiple times with their cries. Can you walk me through like a step-by-step what you would advise in terms of, do I set a timer for 5 minutes? And if they're still crying after 5, I go in and pat them. And then if they soothe, I leave. And then I set another timer. What is the exact, I'm going to try to be pretty literal so someone who's listening can be taking notes and being like, I'm going to try this method tonight.
Actionable steps. I love it. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that your baby is being placed down fully awake, because if all or most of the work is being done for them at the beginning of the night, when they inevitably wake up in the middle of the night, because we all naturally do. So a sleep cycle at night is anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. So babies are going to be waking up when they're shifting from that deeper to lighter stage of sleep. And we want to equip them with the confidence to be able to seamlessly get themselves back to sleep. So when that happens, if they don't need a middle of the night feeding, I would say, okay, one method is Ferber. Another method would be like a pick up, put down method where you can respond to the cry right away. So let's go through Ferber, for instance. So the Ferber method that we go by is actually a modified version of the Ferber. If you were to Google it, it's just simplified. You could start as low or as high as you want. In general, I say start as high as you can, because the more space you can give your baby, the faster they will learn. But you also want to start at a place where you feel comfortable so that you can be consistent. So,
can I just cut in here? How do you respond when someone comes at this suggestion with the idea that leaving a baby to cry for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes is inhumane?
well, if someone came to me,
I'm not saying I feel this way. I'm just asking.
I know. We get that all the time, especially on comments on Instagram. I'm like, do what feels comfortable for you. If what you are experiencing right now does not feel good and you want help, but the crying feels inhumane, then let's talk through another method. Let's talk through a method where you don't have to leave your baby at all crying by themselves, where if they do start crying, go right in there.
Taking aside someone's personal view on whether or not they feel comfortable doing it, is there actual science or data to support whether or not it is actually inhumane or whether or not it is actually affecting your baby long-term in a negative way?
Yes. I have a link in our bio on Instagram that has like a full-blown study about that. I did an Instagram live with that sleep doc, who is incredible. He's head of pediatric sleep medicine at Duke University. And he does this day in, day out, all the research, all of the science behind it. And he always says it is safe and effective for people who want to sleep train. If you don't want to sleep train, that is okay. But if you do, it is safe and it is effective.
So when I see people commenting online that there's actually science that this is harming your baby's attachment style in the long term and that they're going to be psychologically damaged, that is a myth?
That is a myth. And another thing that people are concerned about is the stress of crying. And the stress hormone is cortisol. And one thing I always say about that is, if your baby is chronically overtired because their sleep at night is so fragmented, or they're getting perpetual short naps throughout the day and they're just tired, they have cortisol running through them 24/7, and that's not stopping. Whereas any cortisol secretion, which would be minimal to none with sleep training, is so short term and purposeful that within a few nights, they're going to be sleeping such longer stretches and ultimately through the night that there's going to be zero cortisol secretion.
So we can move on from the cry it out in one moment, but just to cap off this question.
I think it's important.
And I think it's the first thing people think of when they think of sleep training. So I want to harp on it for a moment.
Yeah.
Is there a threshold for this? So you're telling me these studies have been done, this professor, and I've seen other studies as well that say that it's not psychologically damaging, but is there an hour mark or a cutoff or a time code when maybe it would be psychologically damaging if you left them too long?
Right. So again, I've been doing this for over 9 years, and I've never been in a situation, and neither have my clients really, where they were like, this feels awful, like this feels like it's too long. So I say no to that, because it would never get to that point, especially if you're nailing timing, you're getting them down before they're getting overtired and you're staying consistent with the method. The time it takes your child to get to sleep will get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter until they are peacefully and happily drifting off to sleep. So I know the top, say, 5 toughest nights that my clients have had over the 9+ years. Like, I could tell you those 5 clients. Those 5 clients prefaced sleep training to me saying, this is going to be tough. Like, I know my baby, like a lot of them were colic babies who they knew were going to be a really tough go at this. But like within 3 nights, they were like, holy crap, my life is changed. Like my baby and me, we're sleeping now, like we're all getting the sleep we need. And they see the transformation in how their baby is also behaving during the day. Like they're more smiley. They're like, I thought my baby was happy before we sleep trained. Now I just like can't believe. And a lot of people will report, my baby's rolling now, my baby's crawling now, my baby's walking now, like all of these developments that are occurring because they're now getting the rest that they needed.
I feel like one of the things that I've heard people from the anti-sleep training, I'll put them in quotes, people on that anti-side of things say is, of course, after a while of crying, your baby is going to calm down, but it's not because they've learned to self-soothe or it's not because they've been trained in any way. It's because they now are shutting down, feeling no one's responding to my needs.
Yeah. No, I love
And
that one.
that has got stuck in my head a couple of times when I've been doing various methods of sleep training, although I never pushed it past, I want to say 15 minutes. That was kind of my threshold.
And that's okay.
Well, I would love to hear your response to when people suggest that the baby is actually shutting down and feels that no one's responding, so is stopping calling. My takeaway from all of this is you saying there's no threshold. I don't want people to hear that and think, okay, so then literally never respond to your baby and just let them cry all night. I
Right.
think we all can understand here on this show, and anyone that's listening to this hoping to get their baby to sleep, you have to use your judgment, and you obviously don't ignore your baby's
That,
cues.
that's what I was going to say. Exactly. Create your own threshold if it makes you feel more comfortable. Like if your max is 15 minutes, if it's 5, if it's an hour, that is okay for that to be your threshold. But in my experience, it's so effective and it works pretty quickly that we rarely ever get to that point.
Right.
But as far as what you said, yeah, I also get the sentiment of like, is my baby just passing out of exhaustion? And
Right.
I'm
Or
like,
like they're giving up.
yeah. I'm like, no, I swear when you go in their room in the morning, they're going to greet you with the biggest smile. And that is what happens. Like, and we could talk about toddlers later, but the same thing is applicable for toddlers too. And a lot of people are like, they're so much older. They understand. They know, like, they know what's going on. And I'm like, just wait until the morning. That toddler of yours that was screaming for an hour, when you go in there in the morning, they're gonna be like, hey mama, I slept so well. And you're gonna be like, meh.
In terms of babies, something that helped me, I guess, increase my threshold, even though I would say my threshold wasn't that high, but something that calmed me down because it's so anxiety inducing when you hear your baby cry and you're trying to stay out and hoping they stop, was reminding myself that babies often cry just because they're bored and don't know what time of day it is. In the very beginning, I would obviously go in and check, is there a poop? No poop. Is there a fever? No fever. Is the room temperature correct? It's correct. Are they hungry? No, they've had at least 24 ounces in this 24-hour period. There's no reason here why I need to lift this baby up. And crying, it's almost like I tried to reframe in my head what crying meant. It's not I'm in pain, I'm sad. It's not the way that adults feel when they cry.
Yeah.
It's just a baby's way of communicating with the world. They don't have words. They don't have other sociological ways to talk.
Right. So I love that you said that, because whenever a client books a program with us, we have a 15-minute intro call. If they decide they want to move forward, then we have a 1-hour intake call to come up with the entire plan, and a plan that feels very comfortable for them. I always tell them the first 2 nights are going to be the most difficult because, one, more often than not, we're dealing with a little bit of a wonky schedule, and we need to get the schedule buttoned up and getting them down when their biorhythm and their sleep wave is strongest. And the second thing is, it's just new and different. Up until today, you were rocking and feeding your child to sleep at bedtime and for all night waking. So when they wake up, inevitably, they're going to be crying and looking for whatever assistance got them to sleep because that's all they know. So the crying is them getting through this and learning. And it's like riding a bike. Are you never going to teach your child to ride a bike because they're going to fall over, probably skin their knees and start crying? No, you know it's part of the learning process. And I think that that's just an important thing. And I get it. I get it as parents, like, and also for moms specifically, like our hormones are raging. I know with my oldest daughter, when I would hear her crying, it was like electric volts going through my body. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I need to go in there. I need to help her stop crying. You know, it was just like this physiological reaction within me. So I get it. But we also need to have that fine balance of I need to help them. I need to teach them how to sleep well so that they are getting that good, deep, restorative sleep to help them with their overall growth and development and everything.
I love the mindset of this is going to be hard, but you can do hard things and I'm going to hold your hand and guide you through this and we are going to do this together. And honestly, if you think about every milestone of parenting and every hard hurdle that your child has to get over, there are tears and resistance at every turn. I mean, potty training, if I didn't let my son cry during potty training, he would still be in a diaper at 3 and he cried his way through it. And I said, I know it's hard, but this is what we're going to do. And I'm going to help you do it.
Yep. So I would definitely start a bedtime routine around that 12-week mark. And also, I should say, all of these weeks that I'm saying is from their estimated due date. So if they were born 4 weeks early, you would want to bump that out to like 16 weeks because that's where their sleep maturity is based off of.
Can we also just backtrack here for people who are trying to decide if their baby is even ready to tackle a full night's sleep? I know we sort of mentioned milk and making sure they're getting enough milk during the daytime hours so that they can safely sleep through the night. Is there a number of ounces that you usually give? I feel like the whole ounce thing for someone who even is listening to this and doesn't have a baby yet and is trying to wrap their brain around it, the whole like how many ounces are they going to get, how many times a day is such an enigma, so confusing. Even after Milo was born, because I was nursing, I was like, I have no idea how many ounces he's taking in a feed. That is just a big black box for me. But what do you tell people in terms of the stage at which the baby's ready to start any sort of training?
Mm-hmm. So around the 16-week mark from their estimated due date, that's when their internal clock forms. That's when their 3 naps form and they are developmentally ready to be sleep trained. So it is the one regression that has no actual end to it. The way to end it is to teach them how to sleep well. So we want to take advantage of the science behind sleep and that biorhythm. And as far as number of ounces in a 24-hour period is concerned, most pediatricians want babies getting between 24 and 32 ounces in a 24-hour period. So, and I should also say about 50% of our clients are nursing. And I think that that's another myth and something that we should talk about is a lot of people think they can't sleep train because they're breastfeeding, which is not true. For those people, as long as their baby is gaining weight well and on a curve, they're good to go. And they probably don't need a middle of the night feeding. I'd say most of the clients who are including a middle of the night feeding in their plan are moms who are nursing because they're just unsure and it makes them feel more comfortable. So I might have a mom who calls me, we have that 1-hour intake call and they say, yes, my baby is gaining weight well, but I'm nursing and I don't know how much they're consuming. So I would feel more comfortable including one middle of the night feeding. And I'm like, that's no problem because what's going to naturally happen is the baby's going to start sleeping through it. Or you're going to know, I know that they're nursing right now out of comfort and not necessity. So that's totally fine. But if they're getting the 24 to 32 ounces before bedtime, they don't need a middle of the night feeding. And you can approach it in different ways. So if they are getting a middle of the night feeding and you want to get rid of it, if you are bottle feeding, reduce it by an ounce or a half an ounce every night or every other night until you're down to 2 ounces. Once you're down to 2 ounces for 2 nights, cut it and then apply your method to all night wakings. If you're nursing, I would just like time how long a typical middle of the night feeding is, reduce it by 2 minutes every night or every other night until you're down to 2 minutes for 2 nights, and then remove it. So to wean a baby off of a middle of the night feeding is actually pretty simple.
Okay, so now let's get into the baby is not eating or you're no longer offering milk. They're getting the amount of milk they need during the day, but they're still waking up at night. What is our plan?
Yes. Okay. So I would say first, let's settle on a method that you feel comfortable with. And I always ask my client, do you have a high, a medium, a low cry tolerance? And they often surprise themselves at what they feel they can handle. Even if they have a lower cry tolerance, they're like, okay, is this method for a medium cry tolerance more effective? Is it faster? Because if so, sign me up, I'll do it. So I'd say probably 60% of our clients end up going with some sort of Ferber method. And I say some sort of Ferber in that you can modify it in so many different ways. So the true Ferber method has 3 intervals that you go through every single night. You could just do 2 of the intervals. You could, instead of increasing it every night, you could increase it every other night. Like you can really modify it to your comfort level. So if you were to do the true Ferber method, I'd say most clients start at 5 or 10 minutes. If we were to start at 5 minutes, you would start your timer only from the point that the cry became escalated. If they're whining, fussing, that's them self-soothing, and we have to give them the space to learn and figure it out. So you only start the timer from an escalated cry. Once the timer is up, you can go in there for 1 to 2 minutes. You can do whatever you want to do, just no picking up. So you can rub their belly, stroke their face, pat their back, shush them, whatever you want to do, no picking up. You're in there for 1 to 2 minutes, and then you leave. And then you increase the timer by 2 minutes, go in for the 1 to 2 minutes, you leave, and then you go in at the 3rd interval, and you keep going in at that 3rd interval for 1 to 2 minutes until they fall asleep. The next time they wake up, you restart at the lowest interval, and then you do the 1st, 2nd, 3rd until they fall asleep. And you just keep doing that for each night waking. And parents will notice that the time it's taking their child to get to sleep every night is going to reduce. So like, let's say it was 45 minutes. I'd say 45 minutes is typical. So let's say it's 45 minutes for night 1. It's probably going to be about 30 minutes for night 2, and then maybe 15-ish minutes for a few nights. And then it's going to get to the point where your baby is waking up, fussing a little as they shift through those sleep cycles and gets themselves back to sleep.
I know I mentioned this in the intro, but it really is amazing to me how, of course, once your baby is sleep trained, it is great for the parents getting to sleep through the night, and we're all happy at that stage. But the actual act of sleep training a baby and doing this timer, leave the room, set it for later, listen, 2 more minutes, go back in, pat, it's actually one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah.
And a big mountain to get over. And what I'm trying to say is it gets you to a better place at the end, but I think there's this misconception going around online that sleep training is the easy way out and you're just letting the baby cry and it's the easy method. Whereas I actually think it'd be a lot easier to just pick my baby up, bring them into bed with me, and let them fall asleep.
Yeah.
And I'm personally too scared to co-sleep. I would love to get into that and ask your thoughts on that. I'm just too scared because I've heard too many scary stories about it.
Yeah.
There were many times in the middle of sleep training when I was setting these timers and going in and not picking up and patting and really trying to train that I was well aware of how much easier it would have been to just give in and pick them up and fall asleep on the rocking chair with them on me, belly down.
Yeah.
It's interesting. People assume you're taking the easy road out. It's actually, I believe, a higher mountain to climb in the short term for a longer term peaceful life.
Yes. Yeah. I always tell my clients, this is going to be harder on you than it's going to be on them.
Yes.
And the other thing that parents don't realize is how proud they're going to be of their baby, of their toddler, when they start seeing that progress. When they start seeing, oh my gosh, my baby woke up, but they got back to sleep in 3 minutes. oh my gosh, like I have a rock star for a daughter, like they're going to do so well. Like you start seeing those bits of progress or like falling back to sleep for another sleep cycle for their nap. Like parents rejoice. They're so proud of what their babies are capable of. And I think that that's also an important thing to realize that you're going to experience too. You're going to experience the highs and the lows of sleep training.
On that note, it reminds me of a question I've been having, as someone who was pro sleep training and felt like it was in my baby's best interest ultimately to get them sleeping through the night and having that long 12-hour chunk of sleep as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose I don't really know the science behind what is actually best for a baby's health. And I think it's easy for me to apply an adult mindset to the baby and say, of course, getting 12 hours of sleep is great for the baby's brain. But I could see the argument being made by someone that biologically humans did not sleep 12-hour chunks through the night at that age in our past. Like if you think of caveman time period when they were co-sleeping on the floor of the cave with their baby while they nursed, and the baby was up every few hours eating, and they never slept a 12-hour chunk, maybe until they were fully grown adults.
Mm-hmm.
Is there actual data or science to say that it is good to get the baby to sleep 12 hours in a row at night?
So there is a lot of research out there that shows that if your baby is waking up frequently throughout the night, that it's basically like they didn't sleep at night because the sleep quality is so bad. So getting those longer stretches of sleep and more consistent sleep is so important for the actual quality of sleep that they're getting.
Listen, I see the results of that. I mean, as someone who did that and had babies sleeping well, I can see how a good night's sleep affects them during the day. I can see how their daytime naps affect their personality in the evening, and then their ability to sleep at night. And I think it's all my experience of living it proves that it's good for them. It's more so that if someone were to come to me and say, oh, actually, biologically, human babies before the age of 2 are supposed to wake up every 3 hours and have milk, I would say, well, maybe that's true. I could see that being true because that's how it maybe was in the past before sleep training came on the scene.
I would just say there's so much more research now.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much more research now. And I would also say your baby is waking up. Your toddler is waking up.
That's true. She is still waking up.
We're all waking up in the middle of the night, but we're resituating ourselves and we're getting ourselves back to sleep because we have the skills to do that. So they are waking up the tiniest bit as they shift to that next sleep cycle, but they're getting themselves to sleep. If they don't know how to sleep, what happens is they're waking up every sleep cycle, every, let's call it 2.5 hours. And they're like, oh my, where's mommy? Where's those warm arms? Where's the bottle? And they're looking for that. But when you teach them how to sleep well and independently, they're not phased as they're shifting through those sleep cycles, and the quality of sleep they're getting is just so much better.
Can you dive into your thoughts on co-sleeping?
So, I mean, one of my best friends doesn't believe in sleep training. I tell people, I'm like, if what you're doing is working for you and you are getting the quality of sleep that you need and your baby is too, that's fine. You don't need me. But if that's not the case, or if what you're doing just doesn't feel good, call me. I can help you. As far as co-sleeping is concerned, I feel the same way you do. I just think that it's difficult for it to be 100% safe. So that's why I don't like co-sleeping, but you also can't really sleep train and co-sleep at the same time. But if you've figured out a solution and the pediatrician feels okay with the way that you're co-sleeping, then again, that's fine. You don't need me. But if you feel like you're sleeping with one eye open because your baby is right there, then that's not good for you. I will also say there's also the option to room share. You could have their crib or a mini crib a foot away from you or right next to the bed and still sleep train.
I want to go back to the action items, and I know we're kind of like frogs jumping on a lily pad. This conversation is very back and forth. But say you have a client now who says, I don't want to do any amount of crying. So the moment my baby starts escalating, I'm going to go in.
Yep.
What can I do to still get them to sleep through the night without having to listen to a minute of crying?
Okay. If they don't feel comfortable with any crying, then what they would do is if the baby were to start at more of that escalated cry, again, if they're just fussing or whining, like try to give them as much space as possible. If they start actually crying, you can go right in, put your hand, the pressure of your hand on their chest, jiggle them a little bit, console them for as long as you need to until they calm. Once they calm, lift your hand. If they start crying again, put your hand back down on them. If that is not working after, say, 3 to 4 minutes, you can pick them up and hold them. You don't want to be like bouncing them and trying to get them to go to sleep because that defeats the purpose. But you're holding them and comforting them and showing them, hey, I'm here. You've got me. Once they calm, you place them back down. If they start crying again, put the pressure of your hand back on them, console them. And if that's not working, again, you can pick them up and just continue to rinse and repeat that process while keeping in the back of your head that you want to provide as little touch as possible as the nights go on and do as little picking up as possible because it goes back to the more space you can give them, the faster they'll figure it out. And ultimately, it will lead to less crying overall because it will be more effective. But it is a very effective method. I've had parents who come to me and we're nailing timing. So, the way that our programs work when we're working with clients and why it's so effective is because we get them set up with a digital log through Google Excel and they're tracking their baby's sleep every night and every day. So, they're saying what time they put their baby down, what time they fell asleep, when they woke up in the middle of the night, how long it took them to go back to sleep. We're seeing all of that data and it's so cool because every night has a tab. We have like night 1 through night 7 or night 14, depending on if they're doing 1 or 2 weeks. And it's so cool because you see night 1 log will be like down, awake, asleep, awake, asleep, awake, asleep. And then night 2, it's a shorter log. Night 3, it's a shorter log. And it just gets shorter and shorter because they're waking up less.
So you're saying that even just going in, touching them, soothing them without picking them up or picking them up, and then putting them back down awake, and even if that means they're going to cry again, like letting them go through those cycles where you're soothing them, every night it should get shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yes.
So you're not going to have a person who says, "I do that every night and I'm just up all night for months."
Right. So I'd say that method is most applicable for up to 6 months. At the 6 month mark, I would strongly urge them to do no picking up with that method. Because for a baby who's 6 months and older, the picking up and the putting down and the picking up and the putting down can be overstimulating. Or if a client came to me and said, that's basically what I'm already doing, then I would say, okay, like, would you feel comfortable doing that, but not doing the picking up? So, like, changing it a little bit with the goal and the hope that if we're nailing timing based on that log, that the time it takes them to be able to settle themselves will get shorter and shorter because you're giving them a little bit of space and practice and we're nailing timing along the way.
This is partially why I feel like doing some form of sleep training at a younger age is so much easier.
Yeah.
Because at a certain age, they are aware if you are in the room. I mean, someone could argue that a really young baby is aware of someone in the room, but I think that they are also a lot more aloof and a lot more in la la land.
Right. If you have a lower cry tolerance, try to start younger
Right.
because it will be faster and more effective.
I have a friend who was also very against any form of sleep training, and her daughter's now 4, 5, and I guess she just hit her limit of
Yeah.
I've now been not getting full nights of sleep myself for 4 years, and I'm finally needing to work with someone and needing to figure something out. My understanding was that she had to go through 3 to 4 days of something you would never wanna have to go through
Yeah.
with your child, of really just teaching them and having to be a harsher,
Yeah.
more cry involved method to actually get it to work at that age and stage.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are other methods, but she was at her wit's end and decided that's what I'm doing now. And it really is so different from my experience of getting my children to the same stage, but having done it between the 3 to 5 month mark
Yeah.
versus 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, I always say, I'm like, there's no reason to wait. And if the younger you do it, the longer your entire family is going to reap the benefits of good quality sleep. Because I know that when I get fragmented sleep, like I am not my best self the next day in my work, with my husband, with my kids, like nothing. Like I really, really appreciate my sleep. Like it is, to me, it's a non-negotiable. Like I needed to do that for myself and ultimately for my kids, like for their quality of sleep, but also to be the best mom that I can be. And I think it's important. And I think that a lot of moms sort of like lose themselves as far as that's concerned when they have babies, because they feel like they need to be sacrificial of like, I decided to have this baby, so I need to sacrifice my sleep. I need to be up all night long because that's just what it takes to get them to go back to sleep. And I'm like, no, there are other ways. And we've worked with a ton of moms who came to us with postpartum anxiety and depression, and they're like, their doctor was like, you need to seek help for your baby's sleep because of how much it's impacting your sleep, and it just compounds the effect of anxiety and depression. So I think it's just really important for moms to have the understanding that it's not something you're doing to your baby, it's something you're doing for your baby, and it's going to have such positive impacts for the entire family unit.
Let's talk a little bit about daytime sleep and naps and how that is tied to the nighttime and what to do if someone's struggling with the daytime naps.
Okay, so I love this topic because I love talking about like the science behind sleep and those little things. So, sleep debts. Let's say, for instance, a baby is on a 3 nap schedule. We want naps 1 and 2 to be a minimum of 1 hour each in order to be considered restorative. If they are not at least an hour, then that means your baby has a sleep debt. Don't panic over it because we can work on lengthening naps, but if they have a sleep debt from the day, we can repay that debt from the day by making bedtime earlier. And if we make bedtime earlier, that doesn't mean that they are going to wake up earlier in the morning, but that they're actually going to sleep longer and better that night. So that's the first thing, is like, don't panic. If a nap is short while they're learning, just slap that sleep onto their night. They're going to be fine. Night sleep is the most restorative. But to get those naps to lengthen, it's important that we give them that space to figure out how to connect another sleep cycle. So during the day, a sleep cycle is about 30 minutes. So most babies at the beginning of learning how to sleep well, they're only sleeping for 30 minutes for their naps because that's one sleep cycle. And a lot of parents, which I totally get it, they scoop their babies up and they go about the day. I'm like, nope, we got to give them enough time to practice how to get back to sleep for another sleep cycle, at least another sleep cycle. So we want to do crib hour, give them a minimum of an hour in the crib for naps 1 and 2. And that third nap is just a cat nap, but giving them that space to learn how to get back to sleep for another sleep cycle is really important. And what we see happen is that the time it takes them to get back to sleep for another sleep cycle gets shorter and shorter and shorter until they're automatically connecting those sleep cycles and getting to a minimum of an hour, ideally about an hour and a half. But we just got to put in that work and that practice at the beginning of the training and the learning to get them to get those like better, chunkier quality naps.
And I can attest to the fact that, we're on basically a 7:30 to 7:30 schedule over here. And on the nights when we stay out late and we're not putting them into the crib until 8:30, the wake up is closer to 6:30 versus if we were to put them in at 7 or between 7 and 7:15, they are in the crib asleep until the 7:30, sometimes 7:45 mark.
Yes, it's counterintuitive.
Sleep begets sleep.
Yes,
is what I've heard.
Music to my ears. A lot of people think if they have an early riser, oh, I'll just bump bedtime later and that will solve the problem. And then they get stuck and their child is actually now more overtired because it's a snowball effect of that sleep debt. But the best thing to do for an early riser is actually an earlier bedtime, because what happens in that instance is cortisol is secreted, they're overtired, and that's causing them to wake up earlier in the morning.
So that's going to lead us into some of these audience questions, because I saw someone did ask, my baby's waking up at 5 a.m., a toddler even. For a toddler that's doing super early wake ups, you would recommend put them down to bed earlier, bump bedtime up.
Yep. Make bedtime a little bit earlier. They could start with like 15 to 20 minutes earlier for a few nights, see if that works. 15 minutes for a child, while it seems like nothing to us, is huge for them. And that can really make or break how smoothly the night goes. So for a child who's rising early, the factors that I think about when I'm thinking about bedtime is what time did they wake up in the morning? Early rising is considered prior to 6 a.m. So if they woke up before 6 a.m., we want to factor that in when we're thinking about when we're getting them down for bedtime that night. And then what was the timing and the quality of naps that day specifically, which, yes, it's annoying to have to think about those factors every day, but it's just for the purposes of solving whatever sleep issue you're currently experiencing. And then once you solve it, they're going to be fine. Like if you miss that window by a little bit, they're a-okay. But yes, I would do an earlier bedtime.
On to regressions. What are the months or weeks that we can expect a baby to start having some sleep regressions, and what do you do about them?
Love this question. So around the 4-month mark, which is, it's actually 16 weeks, 3.5 months, that's when they hit the 4-month sleep regression. That's a biological shift in their sleep. That's when we need to teach them how to sleep. Whereas all of the other regressions are due to physical and cognitive developments. And once they've mastered that new skill, they go back to sleeping well if they had been sleeping well. So the most common regressions are around 8 months. So 7 to 9 months, they hit the 8-month sleep regression. That's tied to the developmental milestones of crawling, sitting up, pulling up, some cognitive development. So like coming out with little words, clapping, all the things. Any regression besides the 4-month regression lasts like 2 to 6 weeks. And then the next regression is the 12-month sleep regression, usually happens between 11 and 13 months. That is most directly tied to the developmental milestone of walking. So I always give the warning around the 12-month mark, your child is likely going to protest one of their naps, usually that second nap, because nap 2 is tied to physical developments. So nap 1 is tied to cognitive developments, nap 2 physical developments. So when your baby is starting to crawl, sit up, pull up, walk, that second nap is usually most greatly impacted. I say, don't panic, hold steady, stick to your plan. They're going to go back to sleeping well. Don't shift to one nap yet. Like hold on to those 2 naps. So around the 12-month mark, they'll go through that regression. Then around 18 months, they'll go through huge language bursts and cognitive developments. And that one is usually towards the 4 to 6 week mark. And then they'll go through a very similar regression around 2 years old, also tied to cognitive developments and language bursts. And for both of those regressions, the number one sign is separation anxiety. So just like having, especially at that age, having a strong routine and sticking to your plan is so important. Otherwise, you're starting to create these new expectations around sleep, and they'll start to expect you to come in and do all the things, hold them, rock them, whatever. So just sticking to your plan is really important through any regression so that they can get on the other side a lot faster.
Okay, love that. Ugh, I'm so happy that I'm reading these questions now because we touched on so many of them. So people are going to be happy with the questions. Can you just talk us through your recommendation of what we're supposed to be outfitting our baby in from birth through a year in terms of when should they be swaddled? When does the swaddle need to go away? What are the next steps? I mean, we went from the swaddle to the Magic Merlin to a sleep sack, but at least this time, I had no idea what were the months that I was supposed to be doing any of those things. I just did it and it seemed to work and she was the right weight for it. So we did it. What's the science say and what's that progression supposed to look like?
Yes. So swaddle your baby until they're showing any signs of rolling. So during floor time or if they're in their crib trying to get to their side, stop swaddling them. When in doubt, pull an arm out and you can like alternate which arm is out, but just be very careful once they're showing any signs of rolling to take them out of the swaddle. And then you could either put them into, like, if you have a baby who really likes to be contained, you could put them into a transitional sleep sack, like a zippity zip, or you could just do a regular arms out sleep sack. Kite Baby is my personal fave. They're so soft and you can get all of the different togs. So if you're in an area where it's like warmer out, you could get a much thinner one. If you're in a colder area, you could get a thicker one. But sleep sacks are great for as long as your child will stay in one. I have people asking me, okay, when should I do a blanket? Should I do that at 2 years old? I'm like, I get it, but that blanket's going to fall off your 2-year-old and they're going to be calling you into that bedroom all night long saying, tuck me in, the blanket fell off. So like keep them in a sleep sack, I'd say, as long as you can manage to keep them in a sleep sack.
My
And
3-year-old is still in a crib and a sleep sack.
yes. Yeah. And they also have the sleep sacks that have feet. So
Yep.
if you have a toddler who wants their legs to be a little bit more free, you could get a sleep sack where the legs are free.
Right. And he does use a light blanket on top of the sack, but when I look at him on the Nanit, the blanket's strewn off to the side and he's just lying with his pillow and sleep sack.
Most kids don't care really if the blanket's over them, but as parents, we're like, they're laying there without anything. Like, I need to go in and cover them. So I would just say a sleep sack is the easiest thing for as long as your child will take it.
Okay, another question here that's interesting one is there always a quote fix for a baby that's having trouble sleeping, or is it just that some babies can't be sleep trained and some babies are just different?
I always say, as long as there's not a medical issue, all babies can sleep well. All babies can sleep well. We just need to get them on an age appropriate schedule, making sure they're going down within those sweet spots for naps and nights and giving them the time to learn how to sleep. So for some babies, for example, they might not respond well to the gentlest method. And maybe we need to modify that to something that's a little bit more direct so that they can learn faster and it would be more effective. But I truly believe that all babies can be sleep trained. Again, we have worked with thousands of clients. It works. As long as the parents are committed to the program, they're going to get the results. I've never had a client where it just never came together.
It's so true. We could go on this topic. I feel like I'm reading through these questions, and the truth is people are desperate to get their babies to sleep, but also so scared that they're going to do something wrong and that they're harming the baby in some way.
No, I think that that's fair and that's valid. And that's where people like me and my team come into play is like, we get that it's hard. You know, like if I didn't know that much about sleep, I would want someone coaching me and providing me with all of the feedback and benchmarks and letting me know what is normal and holding my hand and explaining. I think that that's a huge piece to all of it too. And like having a sleep coach is that they can help you to feel a lot better about this daunting and overwhelming and stressful process where they can call out progress and what they can expect. So, like, one thing I always tell my clients is usually nights come together, they lengthen and they become more consistent. And then we see nap 1 come together and then nap 2. So, like, if I can tell my client, listen, nights are so solid, we saw nap 1 come together, we need to give it a few days. It might just take a little bit for that second nap to come together. They need more practice. Their brain and body needs to adjust to all of this awesome sleep that they're getting. And then they're like, oh, okay, so this is normal. You're telling me this is normal. Okay, I can keep going.
Yep.
So I think having that like coaching and that reassurance like really, really, really goes a long way for some people.
And I've now had so many friends that have worked with you and loved the experience and are so happy with the outcome. Obviously, for them, their lives are much improved.
Yeah.
So if anyone is interested in this topic, wants more information, you're sharing so much great content on social media that people can educate themselves with and share with their friends and family. Let people know where they can find you and what types of programs you offer.
Yeah, so definitely follow us on Instagram at MyBaby Sleepology. And then our website is mybabysleepology.com. But we can definitely help you, whatever issues you're going through. It literally no issue we can't work with. And as far as the programs are concerned, we have programs that come with daily support. So we have some that come with unlimited text support from morning until evening. We have another program that comes with 2 touch points every day via email. With both of those, you'd get set up with this digital log where you're tracking that data every night, every day. It's shared with one of the consultants on our team. So there's the option to work with me. I'm the founder. And then we have senior consultants on our team members. There's 8 of us. So we're always available. But you would get paired with one consultant and they would be helping you and tracking everything all day, every day, providing you insights, guidance, answering questions, keeping you and your baby on track. And then we have like a smaller program that comes with more of like you execute it, do it, and you've got 3 days of support to fall back on within 2 weeks of that consultation. But between Google and Facebook, we have over 400 5-star reviews. So definitely check those out too. And you can just see where other families were before a program and after a program. The one common thing, I swear, if you went on there right now, like the first 20 you'd read would probably say, I just wish I started this sooner. I wish I started this sooner, and just how life-changing it is. So, and we also have 15-minute intro calls. So if anyone wants to just learn more, they can schedule an intro call from our website, talk with one of our consultants, and we can learn more about what you're going through specifically and answer some questions and how we can help.
Amazing. Thank you, Zan.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Real Stuff podcast. If you're liking the show, please head over to Apple or Spotify and leave the show a written review. If you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment down below and join in the conversation. And if you're feeling called to be a guest on the show, visit luciefink.com/apply and tell us your story. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your attention with us, and we will see you next time on the Real Stuff podcast.
Please note that this episode may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products and services. Individuals on the show may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to in this episode.